So first and goal, Calaveras, Curran under center. He'll hand off. It's the same play. 32 on the left side, and why not? Touchdown, Calaveras!
And again, that left side of that O-line, they're doing a fabulous job. I mean, again, he was around the corner, and he didn't get touched until he got to the end zone.
So with 2:29 left here in the first quarter, Calaveras rushes in their third score of the game. 32, Caden Spur around the left tackle. As soon as he got the ball, nothing but running room. And I'll tell you what, he's got to buy lunch for that whole left side of the offensive line this coming week, right? Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk Football with Coach Val. I'm your host, Gil Valtierra, the voice of Calaveras football. I'd like to welcome our very special guest, one of the world's most renowned mental coaches and founder of Elite Mindset, Mr. Gary Chupik. Gary, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Gil, great to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate you being with us. I thought I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that was.
Well, let me fill in all our listeners here. For those that don't know Gary Chupik is an internationally recognized as one of the top mental performance coaches in the world. Gary unlocks performance in professional teams, athletes, business professionals, and those wanting to find their next level in performance. Gary's unique methods and process are unprecedented in the sports and business world and brings out the very best in each of his clients. And trust me, folks, the client list is extensive. Gary's two world-class signature programs are the Elite Mindset Mental Training System and the Game Plan for Life for High Performance Life. Gary is an international speaker, writer, professional member of the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, certified professional leadership coach through the ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, an ordained minister of 28 years and chaplain of the Seattle Thunderbird for 7 years. Gary's client list includes players, coaches, and executives from the Houston Texans, Washington Huskies, Idaho Vandals, Stanford University, USA Figure Skating, the Seattle Mariners, Limitless Minds, which is Russell Wilson's company, National Motocross Association, CrossFit Olympics, and much, much more. He's worked with high performance in business as well, from Microsoft, the FBI, Police and Fire, Amazon, Keller Williams Real Estate, Thrivent Financial, Boeing, NTT Global, and many more. And Gary is a much sought after speaker, coach, and consultant. And we are lucky enough to have him today at Let's Talk Football with Coach Val. Now, with all this stuff, Gary, and I look at, all the people that you've had the pleasure to work with, you've probably got so many stories. But the first question that comes to my head and sticks out to me is, an ordained minister for 28 years, what was the transition there as far as getting into helping the sports world with sports psychology?
Yeah, that's quite a meandering path to sports psychology, isn't it? Being an ordained minister for 20 years, I would say part of my coaching strategy was not telling, but it was asking good questions along the way. I don't feel like I needed to have all the answers, because who does in this life? So I had experienced a burnout in 2017. And I think the things that were once easy became really difficult. And because I'm not a quitter and I'm very loyal, I kind of kept at it. And even though it was very difficult, I just kind of kept going. And at that point, when you keep going, when you're injured, it's really hard to sort of keep going, and the tendency is to want to bleed out, because you're not a quitter, so you just kind of keep going. But instead of keep climbing the hill and keep charging the hill even though I was bleeding, I decided that the smarter thing to do was go back to the infirmary and get bandaged up so I could live to fight another day. And during that time, where I kind of experienced a burnout and just sort of quit everything, it was like, well, now what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do with my vocation? How am I going to handle this? And make a long story short, I learned the language of sports psychology. I ended up getting some training and going to school and putting in about 1,000 hours of research into sports psychology, just because it was a new language and almost like a new operating system for me to think through a lot of the struggles and challenges that I was having in my own life. And one day, a friend of mine who was friends with Trevor Moawad, who was Russell Wilson's mental performance coach, he said, hey, have you ever heard of Trevor Moawad? Have you ever heard of his books that he had written? And I said, no, I hadn't. And I read his first book, It Takes What It Takes, and I just kind of fell in love with the language of sports psych and how it could help just the average person. And then a friend said to me not long after that, would you like to meet Trevor? And I was like, man, would I? Are you kidding me? I mean, Trevor was at the top of his game at that time. He was on ESPN doing shows and on all major TV networks, and just really an amazing individual. And I got set up with a blind date with him, and we just met every month for the next year. And it was a pretty radical transformation in my life, where he ended up saying, Gary, why don't you come work for me? So that began a journey of sports psych into the business world and into the sports world. So I would say that 50% of my work is in sports, and the other 50% is in business. However, it started exclusively with sports. And I think just now the business world is starting to understand the power of a powerful mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of I would guess, when I try to find some sort of correlation in ministry, you're still helping people, you're still talking with people and trying to, help them navigate through life. And I would imagine you probably still use some of that background even in your work today.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. One of the things that I would say in ministry is I wanted the fruit of my life to grow on other people's trees. And I think that's still the same. There's nothing better for me than to see an athlete succeed because of the work that I've done with them. So yeah, there's a lot of crossover and correlation between the two.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And have you seen, how long have you been doing now the sports psychology thing?
About 7 years.
Okay. And have you seen, like, for me, I was a high school football coach for 24 years. And I remember, back in the mid 90s when I got started, it was the dynamic with coaching ball back then was way different than when you got into the 2000s, as far as approaching athletes and motivating athletes. And have you seen the landscape change as far as how people treat mindset and psychology when it comes to sport?
Yeah, I think so. Back in the day, it was about just being tough. And I remember my coaches when I was growing up and playing high school football, it was not uncommon to see your coach grab your face mask and jerk it all around when he was upset with you. But today we have different ways and different tools to be able to help our athletes succeed. And yeah, it really has shifted. I think that it's much more conversational. It's much more open and transparent, even vulnerable at times. But I think there are so many different ways to unlock performance in somebody. So I believe in the quadratic view of humanity, which is body, mind, soul, and spirit. And I think sometimes we don't tap into all of those very well. And there are hidden reservoirs of performance within every individual that will allow them to go to their next level. And sometimes that's a little bit of a puzzle where you just kind of have to try and figure someone out. But everyone has a next level in them. And whether you're a professional player or whether you're an amateur or high school athlete, you just do have more levels in you. And it's a matter of finding out how to unlock those. And that's part of what the job of a mental performance coach is to unlock those new levels.
Yeah, I kind of when I read your bio on your website, and I noticed when you mentioned unlock performance, and that stuck out to me because it kind of makes me feel like that means we all have it in us. We just don't know how to kind of maybe unleash it or get to it.
Yeah, and there's a sequence to it as well. Like, back in the day when I was a kid, we used to ride these bikes with a banana seat on it, right? Like these amazing big seats that we used to run. And we used to have a lock on them. And then that lock was like a 4-digit combination that you had to get in the right order. And in the same way, I think mental performance is quite similar, where you can have all the right ingredients. Let's say you could have coaching or grit or resilience or self-talk. However, if you don't sequence things in the proper order, you don't get the intended result. And I think sometimes it's like baking a cake. It's like you can have all the right ingredients, but if you don't sequence all the ingredients properly, you're not going to get a cake. In other words, if you put some flour and cocoa in the oven for 45 minutes and bring it out and crack an egg over it and add some water, well, you have all the right ingredients, but you haven't sequenced it properly. So just like unlocking that lock on a bike, you have to find the right sequence to unlock performance in people. And there are some fundamental principles that are there that have to be addressed at the very beginning, or else you're not going to get the intended outcome.
I like that analogy. I think that's a great analogy and very good point. It seems to me, too, that today people seem to be a little bit more open and receptive to mindset and psychology in sport than they were back in the day. I look at, even some of the sport movies out there, Kevin Costner was in Tin Cup, right? And he needed that psychologist to come help him fix his swing.
I remember that. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, from a coaching perspective, we're all pretty well versed at preparing athletes for the season physically. Like, we run them, we get them in the weight room, we're making sure we talk about nutrition. It's all about getting our bodies prepared to play a season and to perform at a high level. How does an athlete train their mind to prepare for a season?
Yeah, well, in my world, we say there's three things that you can train. You can train your body, you can train your craft, and you can train your mind. And the one thing that we probably spend the least amount of time on is training your mind. And so it's an intentional thing. Like, for example, a lot of coaches will talk about mental performance, or they'll talk about some psychological aspects of whatever the sport is, but they really actually don't know how to train it. And I think as I said earlier, there's a sequence to it. Like, for example, coaches will maybe synonymously use motivation as part psychology. But motivation is a really unstable aspect of training the mind. For example, someone could be not very motivated but still do very well at something. And a good example of that would be a Navy SEAL, where they're not always motivated to go through Hell Week. However, if they're self-disciplined and they're self-led, and then they can do amazing things. So motivation to me is like icing on the cake. Like, if you have it, that's wonderful. But the more important thing is your ability to self-lead. In fact, I think self-leadership is the holy grail of all mental performance. And so as we train mental performance, it really does need to start with the foundation of self-leadership. And there are ultimately important questions that we need to ask ourselves in terms of self-leadership. And sometimes self-leadership looks different for every individual athlete. Like, for example, one athlete might say that integrity is self-leadership to them. Or there might be 4 or 5 different things that make up their self-leadership. Another one might be discipline. Another one might be taking the initiative. But everyone's got to figure out what self-leadership looks like for them. But once they get dialed into, maybe motivation isn't really necessary, but they realize that if they put in the work and if they put in the practice, then amazing things can happen. And I think that's really true. I think it's more important to be self-led than to be self-motivated.
That's an interesting concept, because especially being that you're saying it's different for everybody, right? I mean, what motivates one kind of doesn't motivate the other, and that self-leadership being different for everybody. So how does one go about trying to identify, well, what is it for me?
Yeah, sometimes it takes sitting down with a player and kind of unlocking them. And one of the interesting things about the Seattle Mariners is that the Seattle Mariners have a file on every single player. And one of the questions that they ask them is what's the end goal for you? Like, what's the end game? And for some players, it's to get their second contract, because the first contract is usually an entry contract, but that second contract is where they can really attain the resources that they're looking for. For other players, it might be making an all-star game, or for other players, it might be being a Hall of Famer. So, or for some players, it's getting the third contract. So you kind of don't really know what's going to motivate that player and what their end game is. But it's interesting to me that the Mariners have a file on every single player from single A all the way to the major leagues. And if they have a certain or particular goal, then they have to live a lifestyle and be able to put in the work necessary to achieve that. So the leadership of a team, whether it's the coaching staff or whether it's trainers or even the president, they all sort of need to know what is driving the players' motivation for wanting to do as well as they do. And so sitting down and asking them, if this is the goal, and then what kind of attributes are you going to have to self-lead in to be able to attain that goal?
That's interesting that a professional franchise has got records on the mental aspects of their athletes. I mean, you think they're going to, height, weight, how fast you throw the ball, all the physical dynamics around a player, but now they're going deep into what their goals are and where they stand mentally.
Yeah, it's rather interesting. One of the very first things that the Mariners teach their players, and it's actually one of the very initial things that they talk about as a team, is what do you believe that you're capable of doing? Because if your self-belief doesn't match what you're trying to attain, and then we've got a real problem. And here's the way that we think about that is, if let's say you have a desire or a goal of being an all-star. If you don't really truly believe that, let's say your self-belief is at a 6. Well, no matter what gets poured into you in terms of training, then you're always going to leak at a 6. So you will always leak at the level of your self-belief. And that's why belief is no small thing in sports. It's like we often kind of just say, do you believe? And we kind of say it as some type of a little universal mantra. But in reality, it's crucial to your success, because if you don't believe that you can attain something, then you're most likely not going to do that.
That's interesting. And I think I've seen that come to life and fruition in real life. I remember, Gary, when I played football, there was a moment before we took the field, we're completely dressed out, cleats on, fully geared up, helmets on, we're ready to get out there. And our coach would have us sit in this room. There was a dark room, totally quiet, no noise, nobody said a word. And he'd give us like 5 minutes of just this silence, of like this mental self-reflection. And for everybody, I guess it would be different as far as what was going through. Some probably just took a nap. Others might be going, here's my assignment, let me focus on that. What would you say is the difference between, like, when an athlete has to mentally prepare for what would be considered maybe a normal, like, in-season, everyday type game, compared to when they're preparing, say, for like the big game?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because a lot of players will say, well, we just have to prepare the same way. So when you're playing in a big game, you might want to keep the same habits or the same rhythms, the same superstitions, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And then there are other players who want to just sort of embrace the moment and find the uniqueness of that moment. So a lot of players will, try and figure out if they have another gear. Like in some sports, like hockey or in basketball, you can really see the difference between a regular season and a playoff or a big game, and or a championship game. It's just, there's a different quality to it. And I think for some players, the game is, and the moment is too big. And for other players, they just absolutely embrace the moment, and they're able to find yet another gear. So it's a really fascinating study in how players can raise the level of their own play. And it starts in their mind. Mm-hmm. Everything happens twice. It happens in your mind first, and then it happens in real life. And somehow some players are able to find that other gear, and other players struggle to find it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember some of the lessons I learned when I played football, when I was on the field. I was able to kind of translate or transfer those lessons that I learned on the field into my everyday real life to help me succeed. For instance, like repetition, right? Run that play, run it again, run it again, run it again. Next thing you know, hey, we're pretty good at that play. And then I take that into the classroom, redo that algebra problem, redo it again. That repetition helped me succeed in other areas. Are there areas we live in, or in everyday normal life, in our minds, and deal with things mentally, that athletes can transfer over to the field the other way and help them succeed out in competition?
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic to me. In fact, I was just doing a podcast earlier today from an MMA fighter, and he talked about how, what do I do now that I'm in my 40s and I can't fight anymore?
Mm.
And a lot of former athletes are in the same boat. Like there was so much camaraderie, there was so much mental demands, but it drove you. It certainly was right in front of you, and what was right in front of you was succeeding at your sport. But when those things are taken out from in front of you, then how do you live, and how do you sort of make the transition? And there's something that I call whole life excellence, and that is can we take our athlete mindset, that mindset that allowed us to succeed at our sport, and can we allow that to overflow into the different areas of our life? One example of that, as you well mentioned, or something similar, was that athletes have a unique relationship with failure, and they just sort of get back up again and you run the drill again. And it's really interesting to me how the vast majority of all CEOs and C-suite executives, I think the statistics are that, I think it's for men, it's like 87% of all CEOs and execs played high school or college sports. And I think it's even higher for women. I think it's 91%. And so there's something about sports that prepares people for leadership. And whether it's, reframing failure or the self-talk or the teamwork or the leadership that's learned, I don't know if there's anything else in life that prepares people better than sports.
Wow, that's powerful. I mean, I've been preaching that for so long, but to hear it come from somebody that's been around like you have, that's pretty powerful stuff right there.
Well, it's motivating because as you get out on the field and you're coaching a high school student, let's say, the fact that we are teaching them life lessons that they will remember for the rest of their lives is incredibly powerful. And so it's inspiring to me to work with an athlete at any level, because I know that the principles that they're learning, that they'll take on in their future life with them. And that's really exciting to see so many of the students that we work with turn out to be leaders at the next level.
Wow. Yeah. So those of you out there listening, parents of that young athlete, and I know, so we've got a great community out here where we live, Gary, and our parents are fantastic when it comes to just, traveling and all of the logistics and money and everything that it takes to help get their young athlete to practices, to games, to all that good stuff. To hear that besides, whether or not they're going to get a scholarship or not, that the probability of them having success in life, to hear that, I mean, that's got to be reassuring for them.
Well, it certainly is. And here's another really crazy stat. I think it was in the 2019 season in the NHL. If you took an entire picture of the NHL and you looked at the draft, so out of all the players in the NHL in 2019, it's like 37% of them were first rounders, and I think it was 19% were second rounders. Did you know that the third largest group of players playing in the NHL, you would logically say, well, it was the third round or the fourth round or players that were drafted in the fifth round. But the third largest group were undrafted players.
Wow.
At 19%. And so even if players aren't drafted and maybe they don't get that invitation to go to a college, or they don't get the invitation to go to the pros, they still have a shot at succeeding. And I think the mentality that those athletes must have to be able to just kind of keep going in the face of that failure or rejection is amazing. And so the mental game is far more important than most people think. Rejection is not the end. It's only an obstacle.
Absolutely. So let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about mental toughness. And as a football coach for 24 years, I've always felt that mental toughness excuse me, is a must for outstanding players. Is mental toughness something taught when you're little and then you either have it or don't have it as you get older? Or is it something you can learn at any stage in life?
Yeah, I think it's something that you can learn at any stage in life. And I think mental toughness is not necessarily an exercise or a class that we can take. It's a result of a myriad of different tools that people have in their toolbox. So when we put together multiple mental performance skills and tactics, then you end up becoming mentally tough or mentally resilient. And there are different exercises or different topics that if we can daisy chain them together, it really makes a strong bond or a strong mind. Like, for example, like your self-talk, like who talks to you more than anybody else than you?
Right.
You talk to yourself more than anybody. So what you tell yourself about yourself is a crucial story that we can use to put us in the best position to succeed. So that self-talk is definitely a crucial element. Another one might be your ability to reframe failure as an opportunity. And like, for example, if an athlete has a poor game, we can ask them what went well, what didn't go well, what could you do better, and what's next. And that forward-thinking mentality about what's next is the corrections that an athlete can make along the way, so that they're not focused on what's going on inside of them. We want their thoughts to be focused outside of their own mind, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is if a player becomes too self-conscious about their mistakes and what they're not doing right, then they start to not focus on the task. And we want them to be more task conscious than self-conscious.
I like it. So let's talk a little bit about confidence. I've coached so many different types of athletes over the years. I've had kids to where, they're just intrinsically motivated. They you don't really got to tell them much. And then there's other kids you almost have to kind of verbally get into just to get them going. Where does motivation come from, and why is it so different across the spectrum of different kids? And, where do we get it from, and how do we obtain it to hold on to it so we can, help achieve?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I went to a mental performance conference a few years ago, and it was interesting to me that over the course of 3 days, I didn't hear the word motivation spoken one time. In a group of hundreds of mental performance coaches and sports psychologists, very few talk about motivation. And that's fascinating to me, because I think motivation certainly does play a role, but I think it's misunderstood. Like, for example, Coach Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks at the time, now he's obviously coaching in Las Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
but at the time, Coach Carroll told me, Gary, it oftentimes motivation starts with why, right? Like, that's the fundamental question. But one interesting thing that Pete said was it always ends with a who. So it starts with why, but it ends with who. And so who do I want to do this for? Some athletes might say they want to do it for themselves. Some athletes might say, I want to do it for my mom or my dad or my caregiver or a grandparent. But if you can tap into the who, it makes it emotional. And when a player is emotionally involved, they can actually, in the future, trigger their emotions by even the thought of their parent or their thought of their loved one. And so when you can attach a who to it, it becomes very powerful emotionally, and you can tap into that on the snap of a finger. So motivation, that's a tough one. Like, my job is to create hard to beat athletes. And oftentimes athletes aren't motivated in the moment. However, if they're self-disciplined and they're self-led, they can tap into that right away, because they're hard to beat, even if they're not motivated. So, yeah, that's an interesting question about motivation and the role of motivation in sports. I find that motivation can come and go, but that self-determination of self-leadership is really powerful. So, yeah, it's hard to teach motivation. It's hard to find out those reservoirs of performance. And that's why every student and every athlete is just so different.
That's why there's so many, coaches out there that say besides coaching football, they also have to learn how to be a sports psychologist, because they're trying to figure out what motivates this kid, right?
Yeah, it's very true. Like, for example, in my coaching, I have an intake form, and I'll say, hey, what kind of coaching do you respond to? Because there's some athletes that respond to being challenged. There's some that want to be, challenged by or coached by, you being hard on them. And then there, as a coach, there are other student athletes or other athletes that you kind of go, no, you kind of got to find something different other than yelling at them, because they kind of freeze, or they're so afraid of expressive, emotional part of coaching they don't respond well to. So you have to take a different approach with that particular player. So yeah, you just kind of have to find out what an athlete responds to.
Yeah, and that sometimes it can take a whole season or a whole entire time you had them there at the high school level. In a confidence standpoint, I've always been about, to me, confidence is about just being prepared. If you were prepared, you'd be confident because you feel like, hey, I'm prepared. And that a lack of preparation would make me not feel very confident because if I walked in on the test day and I knew I didn't study and I didn't put in the work and I was unprepared, I wasn't going to feel very confident. Is confidence just about being prepared or not, or is there more to it than that?
Well, you have 50% of the answer, which I think is outstanding. So in my world, at the professional athlete level, there's only two ways to build confidence. There aren't anymore. Everything else is sort of what I call faux confidence or fake confidence. But if you want to talk about real confidence, it can only be built two ways. Number one is preparation. So you're 100% right. Is if you're going to give a speech and you haven't prepared for your speech, you have every right to feel quite nervous that you're not going to do well. So preparation, number one, is crucial. It's number one. Number two, I call prove it. So preparation and prove it. And the person that you have to prove it to is yourself, because you have to be able to have a track record of successes that lead you to believe that you can actually do something. And so I'm not a huge believer in positivity. I think positivity does play a role, and I think it can be helpful in a moment. But what is better than positivity is optimism, and it's optimism that gives you confidence. And the reason why I say that is because optimism always requires a reason for you to be optimistic. So if a player thinks that he can do something, I'll say, well, what reasons have you given yourself to believe that you can do that? What reasons have you given yourself to be optimistic that you can actually accomplish that? And if they can give me the reasons, they have every right to feel optimistic that they can accomplish something. Mm-hmm. So they can go and do those things. So those small wins, those small actions that prove things to themselves is crucial, because when they lay their head on their pillow at night, they've got to be able to be truthful with themselves, because they'll know if they're a fraud or not. But if you can look back over your day and say, wow, I accomplished this, I proved something to myself, then you have all the foundation for building confidence. So it's preparation and prove things to yourself. Prove it.
I like it. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned, because some folks might be out there going positivity, optimism. What's the difference?
Yeah, positivity to me is a feeling that comes and goes. So I can be positive in one moment, and then 10 seconds later, I can be negative or pessimistic about something. But optimism is far more of a stable fuel to use. And so if I'm generally an optimistic person, it's because I've given myself lots of reasons to be optimistic about doing something. Even if I'm going to do something new, I can say, well, what reasons have I given myself to be optimistic that I can do this new thing? Well, I can look backwards and say, well, I've done X, Y, and Z. You know what? I think I've done enough to give myself a reason to be optimistic that I can accomplish something.
Got it. That's interesting. I think that's very helpful. Sometimes I feel like too that sometimes you'll have somebody that's almost, you said positivity kind of comes and goes, or sometimes I've seen people where they're just always Mr. Positive no matter what. And then it becomes almost like, I'm not so sure if I believe in how genuine that really is.
Well, it's really true. I had a couple of examples of this in my life that were pretty devastating. One of them was one of my clients from Tacoma, Washington, had a 13-year-old son who had a neighbor who was 13 years old. And they went to Mount Baker here in Oregon a few Decembers ago to go downhill skiing. And they didn't know what a black diamond ski hill was. Now, if you know anything about skiing, black diamond means this is a very difficult hill to go down. So he was with a group of friends, and they were all super positive about this neighbor kid going down this hill. And the kid was just terrified, but everyone was being so positive around him and sort of believing in him that he could do it, that he went down that hill. And the story turns out that he lost his life going down that hill. So, positivity, you could lie to yourself about being good at something that you might not be good at. and it's temporary, right? Like it could change, next minute, next hour, next day. So positivity, you could lie to yourself and it can be dangerous.
Right. Absolutely. So, Gary, earlier you talked a little bit about moments for different athletes. Sometimes some embracing moments, sometimes the moment being too big. That leads me to my next question I have. We've all heard out there of an athlete at the most critical time of a game doing the proverbial, people call it choking. He choked, maybe missed the game-winning shot, maybe missed the game-winning field goal that was presumed to be a chip shot. Where does this phenomenon come from a mentally standpoint, as far as choking? Where some athletes seem to be, when it's that crucial moment, they're like, "Let me be that person, give me the ball," and others seem to run from it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I tend to think it comes from overthinking.
Mm-hmm.
So overthinking, I think of like thoughts like calories. If you eat too many calories that you can't expend, and then what happens to you? You get lethargic, you get slow, you become overweight. It's the same thing with thoughts. If we have too many thoughts going through our head, then what ends up happening is we get slow and lethargic. And so the idea of controlling the amount of thoughts that you have and the expenditure of those thoughts is a really big deal. So, for example, if an athlete is in a big moment and he's overthinking things, and he has so many thoughts that he can't expend in that moment, then all of a sudden he gets thrown off, and so you don't have that sort of that instinctual movement that comes so naturally when the moment's not big. And so this idea of being instinctual rather than overthinking something and it becoming mechanical is a big deal. So I teach my clients something called CAPE, C-A-P-E. And I've had the privilege of teaching this to the FBI, to law enforcement, to athletes. But baseball is a really good example. So imagine a baseball pitcher, let's say, and he has approximately 13 to 17 seconds between pitches, which is the major league average. And I want them to do 4 things. Number one, so think of a Superman cape, by the way. So number one, I want them to control themselves. So it's take a deep breath, and it's the universal sign to calm down. So you want to control yourself. The A stands for assess the situation. They might get the call from his manager. There might be a certain amount of players on base or runners on base. There could be a certain temperature in the air. There's all sorts of things going on, and your brain is such an amazing computer. It assesses unbelievably quickly.
Wow.
So assess the situation. The P stands for make a plan. So what am I going to do in this situation? Where do I intend to throw the ball? What kind of pitch am I going to throw? Where do I want to throw it over the plate? So you're making a plan, and then E stands for execute, which is trust your plan, trust your training, and trust your instincts, because we need athletes to play instinctually, because if they don't, they'll hesitate. And that's when that moment where a field goal kicker misses a field goal, or there's a penalty shot in soccer and the player misses the net, all those kinds of things. So we want players to control themselves, assess the situation, make a plan, and execute. And that 4-step process can take place in a matter of 4 seconds. It could be that fast. That's how amazing the brain is. So we want players to play instinctually, because hesitation in sports is everything. We're talking about milliseconds of differences that change the entire fabric of a game. So playing instinctually is really crucial.
Yeah, one of the examples I have that I wanted to bring up around this area is, I'm not sure if you remember or if you watched this past season, the NCAA men's basketball championship game between Duke and Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Did you watch that game?
No, I did not.
So at the very end of the game, Houston had a chance to win. A 3-point shot would have won the game and had Houston become the national championships. And then they had the ball. Seconds were ticking off. They were going to have the last shot, and they kept passing it and passing it and passing it. I
remember it now.
And nobody wanted to take the shot. And it literally came to the very end, and the guy went up and then didn't pull the trigger on the shot and just let the ball go. And so essentially the national championship was lost because nobody wanted to take the shot.
Yep. So that is such a great example. And instinctually, in a typical game, they may have taken that shot. In fact, they may have wanted the ball in their hands, but because the moment was so big, they forgot to play instinctually.
Yeah. Yeah. So I saw that, and it just blew my mind, like from just that whole standpoint of just the mental aspect of things like that. And then you got guys like Michael Jordan who were just like, give me the ball. I can't wait for that moment.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Michael Jordan had this amazing ability to syncopate his mind and his body, and they were like exactly in syncopation. So I remember at one point Michael Jordan would say, well, the basket was just like a big old garbage can. Like it was just so easy. But he had this amazing ability to operate in the moment in real time. Whereas I think a lot of other players, like if you think about like passing up good shots at the end of the game, you might be thinking about, well, what happens if I miss? Now your mind just went into the future.
Right.
And so to me, performance anxiety doesn't always happen just before a game. It can happen in a game. And that performance anxiety typically results from your mind either being in a different zip code, so it's somewhere else geographically, or it's in another time zone, which is in the future or the past. And so Jordan's ability to syncopate his mind and his actions really was a thing of beauty to watch.
It was a lot of fun to watch, and since then we've had other great athletes that always seem to be what do they call it during clutch times, they rise to the occasion. As other phrases you hear people say that when it's go time they really get going, and then there's others not so much. And I like what you're saying here. I love the whole CAPE thing, with the control, assess, plan, and execute. And the thoughts and calories, that one really connected with me as well. I could see that sometimes, overthinking stuff can really just derail you.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have a certain level of trust in yourself. Like, for example, I like to tell the story of the Apollo 13, how they were halfway to the moon and they realized they were on the wrong course, that they were literally going to miss the moon. And they course corrected along the way. Like you could just imagine they realized halfway to the moon and they were like, wait a minute. And then the entire war room, so to speak, with a big screen, everybody goes crazy and you see papers flying up in the air. And in reality, they were able to course correct along the way, but they were already moving. Right. And I think in the same way, athletes who are learning along the path, right? Like they're already in process, they're already on the path, but they simply can just course correct. And I think that's a really great model for moving forward. Even when you're not 100% sure that you're going to be able to accomplish something, you just got to move.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary, let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about goals and goal setting. I've always been a supporter of breaking down big goals into small, little, easy, achievable micro goals, and then just start kind of Pac-Manning my way and gobble, start eating up all these little easy goals. And then until I get to, hey, I finished the larger one. That was pretty good. What's your take on goal setting for athletes, and how does the mental aspect play in when it comes to goal setting?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Typically, I think of it in terms of what a goal that you might have. Then there's something called a process goal, and then there's a micro goal. Mm-hmm. So we, in the same way that you were just describing, that's my process for accomplishing a goal. So that the process becomes the goal, and then the micro goal becomes the goal, which is just that smaller bite that we can do in a daily fashion. But what I think about goals is it's very tricky because sometimes a goal will be made that you can't fully control. Like, for example, the difference between a goal and a desire. So a goal might be something that you can accomplish all on your own. So, for example, if Gil said that he wanted to run a marathon, well, you don't need anybody's help to do that. You can just go do it. But if you're on a team and you want to finish this race or you want to win a game, well, that then becomes a desire. So your desire might be to win the game, but you can't make it your goal because you don't have full control over that. Mm-hmm. So if you make winning a game as a team a goal, well, now you have a blocked goal that you can't really do on your own. And a blocked goal leads to frustration, and frustration leads to anger. So I would rather make that a desire. Our desire is to make the playoffs. Our desire is to win the championship. That's what the ultimate desire is. So I like to think of goals and desires. I like to classify those. And I know that that's not common vernacular in the sports world, because you might say, well, it's our goal to make the playoffs, or it's our goal to win a championship. But we sort of have to walk on those things, or talk about them sort of sensitively, because we don't want to be constantly filled with anger and frustration. And in a season, most teams at least lose a few games. That's just life.
Right.
So I think being careful with the vernacular that we use, but I think I'd like to use the term vision sometimes instead of a goal. We have a vision of winning a championship, and our desire is to win that championship, but our vision is to win that. But it's filled with all these little smaller goals along the way. So let's just make the goal for us to be the best that we can be at the positions that we play.
Yeah, I like that. Just kind of changing the vernacular a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in football, we always say it's such a tough sport that there's a saying coaches have that it's always, unless you win the very last game, it always ends up bad, right? Because you make the playoffs, and if you don't win the last game, you're going to finish off your season with a loss. So it always finishes disappointing. So that's a tough mindset to go in, knowing you either got to win them all or it's going to end not good.
Yeah, I mean, losing and reframing failure is just part of the deal. And but there are so many wins along the way, and obviously only one team can win a championship, but everybody else does well to reframe if you want to call it failure or losing. But the ability to reframe that into a bunch of opportunities, I think, is a smart thing a coach can do.
I like that, reframing failure, reframing losing, reframing disappointment, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's building stamina and resilience.
Yeah. No, I like it. Gary, we're almost out of time here, but I can't help the fanatic in me and the little teenage boy in me has got to ask some questions around you've been around a lot of sports teams, professional franchises. And so I got a little bit of the stars in my eyes about, you got any stories out there about some of the, celebrity? Have you ever been starstruck where you, oh my gosh, there goes so-and-so and in your workings with working with all these teams?
Yeah, I most certainly do. And one of my favorite stories is about a starting defensive tackle in the NFL. And he was, at that time, this was just a couple of years ago, and he's a big fella. He's a big fella. And when you're face to face with these guys and you're working with them, you just sort of mesmerized by them. And the other thing too is that I'm older now. I'm 56 years old, and these guys are like in their 20s, and they're like the age of my son. So it's like, man, you're just a kid still. Like, wow, like it's incredible that you're this big. But one of the defensive tackles came up to me and said, one of my clients said, Gary, I just need to get faster. Like all I need is like, can you make me, this is literally what he said. He said, could you make me 0.2 of a second faster? Wow. And I said, well, what would that do for you if you were 0.2 of a second faster? And he said, well, that would give me more disruptions, and getting off the ball quicker would give me more disruptions. And I said, well, what would having more disruptions do for you? He said, well, that would put me in a position to get even if I got 3 or 4 more sacks the entire year, just because I was 0.2 of a second faster, then that would put me in the Pro Bowl. And I said, well, what would being in the Pro Bowl do for you? And he said, well, that would get me the next contract that I'm really looking for. That would be the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Sure.
And I said, and what would that do for you? And he kind of just stopped, and he had almost teared up. And he said, I'd be able to buy my mother a house.
Wow.
And I could tell for him, it was the start with why, but that was the ending with the who. And so for him, it was a very emotional thing of succeeding for the cause of his mother and buying her a house, because she had never lived in the house before. She'd always rented in an apartment or whatever. So that's one of my favorite stories, and goes on to say that he accomplished what he wanted to, and we made him 2/10 of a second faster by removing hesitation.
Yeah.
And he just needed to trust his instincts more and think less. And he was able to do that.
That's a great story. And I love this concept of why eventually leads to a who.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that a lot. And I hope a lot of the athletes out there that are listening, coaches, really take that to heart. That's good stuff.
Well, it's pretty interesting because even for you and I, for us to be able to succeed for ourselves to some degree, but I bet that both you and I on this phone call could say, well, who do we want to be successful for? Well, for me, it's my father. And I don't have anything to prove to my mom and my dad. I really don't. They adore me. They love me. I couldn't feel any more loved by them. But there's something about just making my dad proud that would bring me to tears in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have something similar to that, or a spouse or something, but you want to do it for a who?
Yeah, I would say my daughters, leaving a legacy, leaving something behind where even after I'm long gone, they can go, look what dad did, and kind of leaving that legacy behind and having them being proud of me. That's what would do it for me.
Yeah, I love that. It's pretty inspiring, isn't it?
It is. Gary, I thank you so much, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come out and to talk with all of our listeners here in Calaveras. We've gone over so much information. Why don't you share with all of our listeners where they can go if they want to hear more from you? If they, your website, your socials, your Instagram, where they go, man, I got to have more of Gary. Where do I go?
Well, it's very kind of you. Most of my clients hang out on Instagram, so that's where I am. I don't post as often as I should, but it's not my favorite thing in the world to do. But on Instagram, you can find me at Elite Mindset, and I'm the guy with the blue verification dot. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. And people can go to my website, EliteMindsetNation.com, because I want to create a nation of high performers who are courageous and servant leaders. And I just want to create a whole class of people who will just live their life with a sense of whole life excellence. So they can always find me on my website. And I do have a Monday morning mindset, a free mindset text that I send out every Monday morning to thousands of people that just help get their heads straight for the week on leadership and mental performance.
And how would people go about signing up for that?
So they go to my website, Elite Mindset Nation, and right on the front page, there's a little form that they can fill out, and we can sign you up.
Excellent. Well, you heard it here, folks. Gary Chupik, EliteMindsetNation.com. Go to his Instagram. I've been on there. He's been out to, you've been all over the place. I think I saw your last posting. You were at University of Oregon, Arizona State, all over the place, helping coaches and athletes and business leaders of our nation get their minds right and prepared for success. Gary, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. It's really appreciated.
It was a joy. Thank you for having me, Gil.
You bet. No problem. Thank you all out there in Calaveras land for listening. Remember, if you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us on Instagram at Let's Talk Football with Coach Val. Be sure to share the pages with all your followers and friends. Remember, we'll have 2 episodes drop every month from now until August when the high school football season begins. And then we'll start going every Friday during the football season to coincide with the game that week. Until next time, we are out. So first and goal, Calaveras, Curran under center. He'll hand off. It's the same play. 32 on the left side, and why not? Touchdown, Calaveras!
And again, that left side of that O-line, they're doing a fabulous job. I mean, again, he was around the corner, and he didn't get touched until he got to the end zone. So with 2:29 left here in the first quarter, Calaveras rushes in their 3rd score of the game. 32, Caden Spur around the left tackle. As soon as he got the ball, nothing but running room. And I'll tell you what, he's got to buy lunch for that whole left side of the offensive line this coming week, right?